The morning sun filtered through the oak leaves as Tsali reached the creek, his steps cautious yet determined. His experienced hands found the smooth stone where he always sat, and he tilted his face to feel the golden warmth he could no longer see. The scars crossing his eyes bore silent witness to the battle against white soldiers 3 winters past, when he alone defended the mountain pass so families could escape. Those marks told a story of sacrifice that few understood, carved deep into flesh that had once been unmarked and proud. Village sounds reached him on the wind, children playing, women preparing corn, men sharpening tools. Tsali knew every sound, every voice, every whisper that fell silent when he passed. Once the most valued of warriors, he was now seen as a burden, a constant reminder that even the strongest could be broken. The same people who had once sought his counsel now avoided his presence, as if blindness were a contagious curse that might spread through proximity. He had learned to navigate the world through touch, sound, and scent. His hands could distinguish every type of wood, every medicinal herb, every texture of leather. His ears caught the slightest movement in the forest, the most distant rumble of danger. His nose could identify individuals by their unique scent, track animals through dense underbrush, and detect the subtle changes in weather that others missed. But none of that mattered to the others. They saw only what he had lost, not what he had gained. The memories of his former life haunted him daily. He remembered leading hunting parties through treacherous mountain terrain, teaching young warriors the art of silent movement, standing guard while families slept safely in their homes. Those days felt like dreams now, distant and unreachable. Yet something deep within him refused to surrender completely to despair, a flame that flickered but never quite died. The sound of soft footsteps on damp earth made Tsali raise his head. These weren't the heavy steps of men or the hurried walk of village women. These were different, hesitant, as if the person walked always ready to flee. He knew who it was before he even caught her scent of wild sage and wet earth. Itzel approached the creek from the other side, keeping her distance. She had been banished from the main village 2 years ago, forced to live in the abandoned cabins of the forest for refusing an arranged marriage and choosing to live alone. Tsali had never seen her, but he knew her story. Everyone knew the woman who had defied tradition and paid the price of isolation. Her footsteps created a rhythm that spoke of careful consideration, each placement deliberate and measured. She moved like someone who had learned to be invisible, to disturb as little as possible while still claiming her right to exist. Tsali found himself holding his breath, afraid that any movement might frighten her away. This mysterious presence had become the most interesting part of his monotonous days, a puzzle he longed to solve. As she settled by the water's edge, Tsali caught fragments of her daily routine through sound, the gentle splash of water as she filled her container, the rustle of fabric as she adjusted her position, the almost inaudible sigh that spoke of weariness beyond her years. He wondered what thoughts occupied her mind during these solitary moments, what dreams she still dared to harbor despite her exile. In the days that followed, Tsali began to notice that Itzel came to the creek at the same time each day. She never spoke, but he felt her presence like one feels an approaching storm. There was something in her energy that intrigued him, a contained strength, a dignity that exile had failed to break. He began leaving small gifts on the stone where she usually sat, wild berries he found by touch, small wood carvings his skilled hands could still create. Each offering was carefully considered, a silent message of recognition and respect. The berries were always the sweetest he could find, located through memory and careful exploration of familiar paths. The carvings grew more elaborate as days passed, first simple animals, then intricate patterns that told stories without words. His fingers worked late into the night, guided by memories of techniques learned in childhood, when his grandmother had taught him that wood held spirits waiting to be released through patient carving. Itzel watched the blind warrior with growing curiosity. She had heard stories of his bravery, how he had saved dozens of lives before losing his sight. She saw how he moved with particular grace, as if he had developed his own dance with the invisible world. His gestures were precise. His hands spoke a language she was beginning to understand. There was poetry in his movements, a fluid adaptation that spoke of inner strength rather than defeat. She observed him from her hidden vantage point among the willows, noting how he tilted his head to catch sounds others would miss, how his fingers explored surfaces with the delicacy of a scholar reading ancient texts. His face, marked by war but not hardened by bitterness, held an expression of constant listening, as if the world whispered secrets only he could hear. One morning, when Tsali arrived at the creek, he found something different. Small stones had been arranged in a pattern by the water, not randomly, but with artistic intention. He ran his fingers over the design and understood it was a compass rose, pointing to the 4 sacred directions. Itzel had left her silent response to his gifts. The stones were smooth river rocks, carefully selected for their shape and texture, arranged with the precision of someone who understood the language of symbols. The pattern told him more than he had expected. Each stone was positioned according to Cherokee tradition, the east stone slightly larger, to honor the direction of new beginnings, the west stone darker to represent the place of reflection. She knew their customs intimately, despite her exile. This wasn't the work of someone who had abandoned their heritage, but rather someone who carried it like a flame in darkness. From that day forward, they established a wordless language. She arranged stones, branches, and flowers in patterns that told stories. He responded with increasingly elaborate carvings, small sculptures his hands created guided only by his heart. These were intimate conversations conducted through art, 2 exiles getting to know each other through the beauty they could still create. Each exchange deepened their understanding, building a bridge across the silence that separated them from the rest of the world. The patterns grew more complex as weeks passed. Itzel created mandalas from autumn leaves that spoke of the changing seasons, spirals of small shells that echoed the eternal dance of water and time. Tsali carved miniature totems that told the story of his journey from sight to insight, each piece more revealing than the last. Their silent dialogue became the most honest conversation either had experienced in years. Autumn arrived, painting the mountains red and gold. Tsali felt the change in the air, in the texture of leaves beneath his feet, in the different sound of the wind. Itzel had become an essential part of his days, a presence that warmed his soul like the sun warmed his face. He began to understand that what he felt for her transcended gratitude or companionship. It was something deep and transformative, a love born from mutual recognition between 2 wounded souls. Winter brought with it more intense loneliness. Tsali walked through the village, feeling the weight of pitying stares and muffled whispers. Families gathered around fires, sharing stories and laughter, while he remained on the periphery, included by obligation but never truly accepted. His disability had become an invisible barrier separating him from the community he had once led. The warmth of human connection, once taken for granted, now seemed as distant as the stars. Children would fall silent when he approached, their natural curiosity stifled by adult warnings about bothering the damaged warrior. Young men who had once sought his training now averted their eyes, uncomfortable with the reminder of vulnerability. Women who had once welcomed his presence at their hearths now offered perfunctory kindness that felt more like charity than genuine care. The winter ceremonies proceeded without his participation. Traditions he had helped maintain for years continued as if he had never existed. His knowledge of ancient hunting grounds, his understanding of seasonal patterns, his expertise in reading weather signs, all of it dismissed because his eyes could no longer see. The community had decided that a blind man had nothing valuable to offer, despite the wisdom he had gained through suffering. Itzel faced her own isolation in the forest cabin. The nights were long and cold, and she wondered if she had made the right choice in refusing the arranged marriage. Her freedom had cost her dearly, not just exile, but the constant reminder that she had defied sacred norms for her people. Still, when she thought of Tsali, she felt a peace she hadn't known in years. His silent gifts had become beacons of hope in her solitary existence. Her cabin, built by her own hands from salvaged materials, stood as testament to her determination to survive independently. She had learned to trap small game, to preserve food for the harsh months, to maintain a fire through the longest nights. Yet despite her practical successes, the emotional toll of isolation weighed heavily. Some mornings she woke wondering if she would forget how to speak, having heard only her own voice for days. The stories she told herself by firelight grew longer and more elaborate, featuring characters who lived in worlds where love was not bounded by convention, where strength was measured by the heart rather than adherence to tradition. These mental escapes kept her sanity intact during the darkest hours, when the wind howled through gaps in the wooden walls and reminded her of her complete vulnerability. During a particularly intense snowstorm, Tsali made a decision that would change everything. Guided only by memory and intuition, he crossed the snow-covered forest until he found Itzel's cabin. His hands found the wooden door, and he knocked gently. When she opened it, the cold air brought with it the familiar scent of sage and wet earth, now mixed with the aroma of pine smoke. The warmth that rushed out to greet him carried more than heat. It carried the essence of a life lived with determination and quiet dignity. Itzel led him to the fire, where they sat in shared silence. For the first time, they were truly alone, away from the judgments and expectations of others. Tsali extended his hand, and Itzel took it without hesitation. Their fingers intertwined like tree branches that grow together, and in that simple moment, both understood they had found something rare and precious. The calluses on their hands told stories of survival, of work done without complaint, of strength discovered through necessity. Hours passed like minutes. Tsali felt Itzel's face for the first time, his fingers delicately tracing the lines of her features, memorizing every curve, every expression. She closed her eyes and surrendered to that reverent touch, feeling seen and understood in a way she had never experienced. When the snow stopped falling, they already knew their destinies were irreversibly intertwined. The storm outside had been nothing compared to the tempest of emotion that had awakened within their hearts. Spring brought new energy to Tsali. He moved through the village with renewed dignity, as if he had found a purpose beyond his own survival. Others noticed the change. There was something in his bearing, in the way he carried his head high, that awakened curiosity and speculation. Some whispered that he had found a new reason to live, though no one knew exactly what it was. His morning walks became purposeful journeys rather than aimless wandering, his posture straighter, his step more confident. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Tsali had stopped apologizing for his presence, stopped shrinking away from conversations. He began offering advice when asked, sharing observations about weather patterns and animal behavior that proved surprisingly accurate. Slowly, almost reluctantly, some community members began to remember why they had once valued his counsel. His blindness remained, but something essential had returned to his spirit. Itzel, meanwhile, began venturing closer to the main village. She gathered medicinal herbs nearby, always maintaining respectful distance but no longer hiding completely. There was new strength in her movements, a confidence that love had awakened. Some older women watched her with curiosity, remembering the defiant young woman who had chosen exile in the name of her freedom. Her posture spoke of someone who had found peace with her choices, who no longer sought approval but had discovered self-worth. She had begun creating beautiful objects during her solitary hours, woven baskets of remarkable intricacy, beadwork that rivaled anything produced in the main village, pottery that showed both technical skill and artistic vision. These creations were not born from mere boredom, but from a spirit that had learned to channel pain into beauty, isolation into creativity. Occasionally, she would leave these items where village women might find them, anonymous gifts that sparked whispered conversations about their mysterious creator. During the full moon of April, Tsali made a decision that would change their lives forever. He had spent weeks carving a small ring from cherry wood, working only by touch until it was perfect. Every detail had been carefully considered. The small carved flowers, the lines representing the four winds, the smoothness that would make the ring slide perfectly onto Itzel's finger. The wood had been selected from a tree struck by lightning, considered sacred for its ability to survive nature's most violent force. The carving process had become a meditation, each cut of the knife guided by intention rather than sight. He worked by moonlight and firelight, his fingers reading the wood's grain like a sacred text. The design that emerged seemed to create itself, flowing from some deep well of inspiration. When completed, the ring held more than artistic beauty. It contained his hopes, his dreams, his promise of devotion that transcended physical limitations. When she arrived at the creek that morning, Tsali was waiting with a solemnity she had never seen before. He stood when he heard her approach, and for the first time in months, broke the silence that had become their language. His words were simple, but carried a truth that came from the depths of his soul. He loved her, wanted to spend the rest of his life by her side, and was willing to face any consequence for it. His voice trembled with emotion barely contained, with vulnerability that required tremendous courage to express. He spoke of seeing her through senses beyond sight, of recognizing in her a kindred spirit that made his heart complete. He described how her silent presence had become essential to his existence, how her artistic responses to his offerings had shown him that true communication transcended words. His proposal was not just an offer of marriage, but a recognition of souls that had found their perfect match in an imperfect world. Itzel felt her heart race. She had dreamed of this moment, but also knew what it meant. Accepting Tsali's proposal wasn't just a personal choice, it was an act of defiance against the norms that had exiled them both. She looked at the brave man before her, saw the vulnerability in his war-marked face, and knew her answer had been decided long ago. Her response came not in words, but in actions, as she reached for the ring with hands that trembled with joy and anticipation. The Harvest Festival day arrived with special energy. The entire village gathered in the great circle, whole families dressed in their finest clothes, children running between fires, elders telling stories lost in the memory of time. Tsali had decided this would be the day before everyone when he would make his love for Itzel public. He knew it would be a moment of great vulnerability, but also of great courage. The festival atmosphere, with its emphasis on community and tradition, seemed the perfect setting to challenge both. The preparation for the festival had taken weeks. Women had spent countless hours creating traditional foods. Men had prepared ceremonial items. Children had practiced dances passed down through generations. The air buzzed with excitement and anticipation, everyone eager to celebrate another successful harvest season. For most, it would be a day of joy and unity. For Tsali, it would be a day of reckoning. Itzel remained in the forest shadows, watching the preparations. She had accepted Tsali's proposal weeks ago, but they both knew the real test would come when they faced the community's judgment. Her fingers touched the cherry ring she now wore on a chain around her neck, hidden beneath her clothes. It was a symbol of hope in a world that seemed determined to deny them happiness. From her hiding place, she could see the elaborate decorations, smell the feast being prepared, hear the laughter of children who knew nothing of the drama about to unfold. The festival began with traditional ceremonies honoring the four directions and giving thanks for the season's abundance. Tsali participated as he always had, his knowledge of ritual movements unimpaired by his blindness. He moved through the opening ceremonies with dignity, but those watching closely could sense the tension in his bearing, the purposefulness that went beyond mere participation. When the sun reached its highest point, Tsali walked to the center of the circle. His steps were careful but determined, guided by familiar sounds and the memory of countless previous festivals. The murmur of conversations gradually diminished until heavy silence settled. Everyone knew something important was about to happen. The very air seemed to thicken with anticipation as the blind warrior positioned himself in the sacred center where only the most important announcements were made. He began by acknowledging his gratitude to the community that had cared for him despite his limitations. He spoke of the long journey from despair to hope, from isolation to the possibility of connection. His words were carefully chosen, delivered with the oratory skill that had once made him a respected leader. Some listeners began to relax, thinking this would be a simple expression of thanksgiving. In a clear, firm voice, Tsali announced his intention to marry. He spoke of true love, of companionship that transcended physical limitations, of a woman who had shown him that blindness was not a death sentence for the soul. When he revealed it was Itzel, the exiled woman, a murmur of shock rippled through the crowd like a disturbing wave. The announcement hit the gathered community like a physical blow, transforming the festive atmosphere into something charged with tension and disbelief. Some people rose to their feet in shock. Others remained seated but leaned forward in astonishment. The careful social order of the festival had been shattered by this unexpected declaration. Mothers pulled their children closer. Elders exchanged meaningful glances. Young warriors looked uncertain about how to respond. The sacred circle had become an arena of conflict between tradition and individual desire. The laughter began slowly, uncertain, but soon transformed into a cascade of mockery. Some people pointed, others shook their heads in disapproval. Cruel comments flew like arrows. A blind man proposing to an exiled woman, two rejects trying to form a family, blindness preventing him from seeing the reality of his situation. Tsali remained motionless, absorbing each word like physical blows, but maintaining his dignity intact. Each laugh felt like a betrayal, each mocking comment a reminder of how far he had fallen in their estimation. The silence that followed the laughter was almost deafening. Tsali remained in the center of the circle, his face serene despite the public humiliation. He had expected this reaction, but feeling it on his skin still hurt deeply. His hands trembled slightly, the only external evidence of the emotional storm he faced internally. Some of the younger warriors began approaching, clearly ready to escort him out of the circle. The festival that had begun with celebration was turning into a spectacle of cruelty. The mockery had awakened something ugly in the crowd, a mob mentality that fed on the misfortune of others. Comments grew harsher, laughter more pointed. Some began to enumerate his disabilities, to question his sanity, to suggest that exile might be appropriate for him as well. The community that had once honored him as a hero now seemed eager to complete his destruction through public humiliation. It was then that a different sound cut through the air. Soft but determined footsteps approached the circle. Itzel emerged from the forest, walking with a grace that made the murmurs cease instantly. She had dressed in her finest traditional clothes, a soft leather dress decorated with beads that had belonged to her grandmother, hair braided with eagle feathers she had kept since youth. Every detail of her appearance spoke of preparation, of deliberate intention to claim her place in this moment. Her emergence from the shadows was like a vision materializing from the spirit world. The intricate beadwork on her dress caught the sunlight, creating patterns of light that seemed to dance across the leather. Her hair, traditionally braided and adorned, proclaimed her Cherokee heritage despite her exile. She moved with the confidence of someone who had made peace with her destiny and was prepared to face any consequence. She entered the sacred circle without asking permission, her presence causing respectful silence even among those who had rejected her. Her eyes found Tsali, and though he couldn't see her, he felt her approach like sunlight after a storm. She walked directly to him, stopping just a few steps away. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the exiled woman took her place beside the blind warrior, their two forms creating a powerful image of solidarity against rejection. The contrast between her dignity and the crowd's earlier mockery was stark and uncomfortable. Here was a woman who had been punished for choosing independence, standing beside a man who had been diminished for losing his sight. Together, they represented something the community had tried to forget, that worth was not determined by conformity, that love could exist outside sanctioned boundaries. Itzel removed the cherry ring from the chain around her neck, holding it in her open palm. In a clear voice that reached every corner of the circle, she publicly accepted the marriage proposal. Her words were simple, but carried a truth that cut through all social conventions. She loved Tsali not despite his blindness, but because of the extraordinary man he was. Her acceptance was not defensive or apologetic, but proud and definitive, a declaration that their love was worthy of respect regardless of others' opinions. The crowd's shock was palpable. Some people began to stand, others whispered furiously among themselves. The elders exchanged glances with expressions ranging from surprise to indignation. It was a moment of crisis that could forever change the village's dynamics. The festival had become something unprecedented, a public challenge to the community's values and prejudices. Itzel knew she needed to do more than just words to win the respect they both deserved. Words could be dismissed, arguments could be countered. She needed to speak in a language the community would have to acknowledge, to demonstrate worthiness in terms they could not ignore. The moment called for something beyond ordinary response, something that would transform judgment into recognition. Itzel raised her hands to the sky, and her body began to move in a dance few had seen before. It was the healing dance, a sacred ceremony that only the most respected women of the tribe had the right to perform. She had learned it secretly from her grandmother years ago, but had never had the courage to perform it publicly. Now, with her and Tsali's future at stake, she offered the community the most precious of her gifts. The dance was more than performance. It was prayer, protest, and proclamation combined into one powerful expression. The healing dance was ancient, its origins lost in the mists of Cherokee history. Legend held that it could bridge the gap between the physical and spiritual worlds, that it possessed the power to mend what had been broken, relationships, spirits, even entire communities. As Itzel began the ritual movements, she was invoking powers that transcended human judgment, calling upon ancestral wisdom to guide the hearts of those watching. Her movements were fluid like water, powerful like mountain wind. She danced around Tsali, her hands telling both their stories through ancestral gestures. She narrated without words his bravery in battle, his struggle against darkness, the strength he had found in adversity. Her tears fell silently as she danced, but they were tears of pride, not sadness. Each gesture was precise, loaded with meaning that spoke directly to the spiritual consciousness of her people. The dance told the story of two souls finding each other across impossible distances, of love that transformed weakness into strength, of courage that faced rejection without flinching. Her body became a living poem, her movements a language older than words. She danced their courtship by the creek, their silent exchanges, the moment when two exiles recognized their perfect complement in each other. The crowd was mesmerized. Even those who had laughed minutes before now watched in respectful silence. Itzel's dance awakened ancestral memories, connections to traditions that had been forgotten in the pressure of daily life. She was showing everyone that true love knows no limitations, that two wounded souls can heal each other, that strength can be born from vulnerability. The sacred nature of her performance made mockery impossible. This was prayer made visible, tradition honored through the most ancient of expressions. As the dance progressed, something shifted in the atmosphere. The hostility began to transform into something else. Recognition, perhaps, or at least the acknowledgement that what they were witnessing transcended ordinary human drama. Itzel was not just defending her choice, but educating the community about the nature of love itself, demonstrating truths that social conventions had obscured. Tsali felt each of her movements through vibrations in the ground, through the air moving around him. He understood the dance through his other senses, and his heart expanded with gratitude he couldn't express in words. Itzel was fighting for both of them in the only way she could, through beauty, through tradition, through spiritual connection that transcended physical limitations. Her dance was creating sacred space around them, transforming the circle of judgment into a circle of possibility. When the dance reached its climax, Itzel stopped before Tsali and extended her hand. He took it without hesitation, and together they knelt in the center of the circle. The gesture was an offering to the community, a demonstration of humility and respect for traditions, but also an affirmation that their love was as sacred as any ancestral ritual. Their joined hands created a powerful symbol, two people choosing each other despite every obstacle, love persisting in the face of rejection. The kneeling position was significant in Cherokee tradition, representing not submission but reverence, a recognition of forces greater than individual desire. By assuming this posture together, Tsali and Itzel were acknowledging the community's authority while simultaneously asserting their right to happiness. It was a masterful gesture that honored tradition while challenging its limitations. The silence that followed was different from all the others. It wasn't the silence of mockery or discomfort, but rather a silence of deep contemplation. Itzel's dance had touched something fundamental in the collective soul of the village, reminding everyone of values that had been obscured by social conventions. An elder woman rose slowly, her eyes bright with tears of recognition. She remembered her own grandmother performing the healing dance decades ago, recalled the power it held to transform hearts and minds. This elder, Grandmother Willow, was one of the most respected members of the community. Her word carried weight that could influence entire decisions. As she approached the kneeling couple, murmurs of anticipation rippled through the crowd. Her judgment would likely determine how the community responded to this unprecedented situation. Her weathered face showed the wisdom of many seasons, the understanding that comes from witnessing the full cycle of human experience. She approached the kneeling couple and placed her hands on their heads, pronouncing a blessing few expected to hear. Her words echoed through the circle, acknowledging that true love was rarer than any treasure, more powerful than any tradition. She spoke of the courage required to love without guarantee, of the strength found in accepting others' imperfections, of the healing that occurs when two wounded souls choose to trust again. Her blessing was comprehensive, addressing not just the couple but the community's responsibility to nurture love wherever it appeared. She reminded everyone that their traditions celebrated courage, honored those who faced adversity with dignity, and taught that the greatest strength often emerged from the greatest vulnerability. Her words reframed the entire situation, transforming what had seemed like defiance into an embodiment of Cherokee values. Other elders began joining her, forming a circle of approval around Tsali and Itzel. Each added their own words of recognition, acknowledging the courage displayed, the authenticity of emotion witnessed, the power of the dance to reveal truth. The elder circle represented the community's deepest wisdom, its most mature understanding of human nature. Their approval carried more weight than any formal ceremony could provide. What happened next was something no one could have predicted. Entire families began approaching, offering traditional wedding gifts. Children ran to bring wildflowers. Women offered carefully embroidered fabrics. Men presented tools that had been blessed for generations. The village was transforming the moment of rejection into a celebration of union. The shift was organic, born from genuine recognition rather than forced politeness. The gifts were not perfunctory offerings, but meaningful contributions that spoke of true acceptance. A hunting knife passed down through 5 generations, a blanket woven with patterns that told family histories, beads that had adorned brides for countless seasons. Each gift represented a bridge rebuilt, a relationship restored, a community learning to see beyond its own limitations. Tsali and Itzel were led to the center of the main circle, where an impromptu ceremony began to take shape. It wasn't exactly like traditional weddings, but there was something more authentic about it, born from necessity, from mutual recognition, from love's triumph over prejudice. They exchanged simple but profound vows, promising to care for each other through all the seasons of life. Their words were witnessed by a community that had learned something important about the nature of love and acceptance. The ceremony incorporated elements from the traditional wedding ritual, but adapted them to acknowledge the unique circumstances. Instead of formal family negotiations, there were spontaneous offers of support. Instead of predetermined roles, there was organic participation from community members who had been moved by what they witnessed. The result was something both ancient and revolutionary, traditional and transformative. When the sun set that night, Tsali and Itzel walked hand in hand to their new home, a cabin the community had offered to build near the village. The construction would be a communal effort, a physical manifestation of their restored place in society. They had won more than acceptance. They had won the respect and admiration of people who had initially rejected them. Their story would become a legend told around fires for generations, a reminder that true love can transform not just 2 people, but an entire community. In the quiet nights that followed, when Tsali felt Itzel's face beside his, he knew he had found something more precious than sight. He had found a soulmate who saw him exactly as he was, and loved him even more for it. Their love had become a beacon of hope for others who felt marginalized, a proof that healing was possible even for the deepest wounds. The seasons that followed brought them deeper into the community's life. Tsali's wisdom was sought again, his knowledge valued for the unique perspective blindness had given him. Itzel's skills were recognized and celebrated, her artistic abilities contributing to the village's cultural richness. Together, they had created something beautiful from their individual brokenness, proving that love could indeed conquer the limitations that society imposed. Their marriage became a symbol of transformation, not just for themselves, but for their entire community. Children grew up hearing their story, learning that love was more powerful than prejudice, that courage could overcome any obstacle. The creek where they first met became a place of pilgrimage for young lovers, a reminder that true connection could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances. If you like this story, leave a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next stories.